Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. As we come to the end of the first year of Donald Trump's second presidency, a political shift is underway in the United States. Political and demographic changes across the country have seen a new generation of leaders stepping forward and a different approach to multilateralism. But what does it all really mean for America and its relationships with the rest of the world? Here with me now are Charles Kupchan, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and Professor of International Affairs at Georgetown University. Dr. David Andersen, Associate Professor in US Politics in the School of Government and International Affairs at Durham University. And Mark Shanahan, Political Engagement Professor at the University of Surrey. Thank you all for coming on the agenda. Charles, let me start with you. What political shift do you see taking place in the United States?
Well, if you sort of step back from the headlines, I would say the biggest political shift we've seen, and it's unfolded over the last couple of decades, is the hollowing out of the political center, the erosion of the middle class and the impact of that erosion of the middle class on ideological moderation. And in general, I think the main cause of this is automation. It is the impact of ones and zeros of the digital revolution on the earning power of many working Americans, and in particular, working Americans without a college education. They've seen their earning power erode over the course of the last several decades, and into that gap between a left that has gone left and a right that has gone right, you have a populist, Donald Trump, who has effectively come to power on the politics of grievance. If you were to sort of zero down on what's happening today, I would say over the last few weeks, we have seen for the first time the beginning of pushback against Trump, and in particular, Republicans beginning to distance themselves from the president because some of his policies are not going over very well. But the big picture, I think, is hollowing out of the political center, Trump manipulating the politics of grievance to tell those Americans that feel left behind that he has their back. Now the question is, can he deliver?
David, is that how you see it too?
I agree with that almost completely. What I would add to that is that during this hollowing out of America, the decline of the middle class, it has gotten harder for your average American to simply survive in the United States. And the political system over the last 40 years has done very little to respond. The government of the United States today looks quite similar to the government of the United States in 1945. A lot of the institutions of American governance were created in the post-war era. They were created to deal with the problems that existed then, and they have not evolved very much over the last several decades. And the American people, I think, have grown increasingly frustrated with politics as normal. And they are desperate right now to see a new conversation start, addressing issues that they really care about and creating new solutions to problems that are very real to most Americans. Donald Trump has spoken to them and has been doing so for about 10 years, but I agree, a lot of people are starting to get tired of his grievance politics. Trump is very good about telling us what is wrong with the world and whose fault it is, but he's very poor at actually proposing solutions. And Americans, and I think a lot of people around the world right now, are feeling rather desperate for some solutions.
So let's talk about people around the world. Mark, how is what's happening in the US distinct from what's happening in other places around the globe?
Well, if we look at the world in general, 2025 has not been a particularly good year for democracy. And Trump is not distinct in that. If we look at what's happened in terms of the rise of strongman politics, this has been coming for a while. And it turns out that these are the people that Donald Trump would really like to impress. So he has moved much more into that framework than previous presidents would have. It's obviously not gone all that way. You can look at some of the recent strongmen. People like Bolsonaro is now in jail in Brazil. You can look at Modi has had his wings clipped in India, and democracy has spoken over there. If we look at Europe, so I sit in Europe and I look at some fairly weak politics at the moment, be it in Germany, be it in France, be it in the United Kingdom as well. Some of that is a reaction to America First and this more robust pro-American politics that Trump has brought to the table. Some of it is just not a particularly strong time for a fairly tired form of democracy that's around at the moment, as David said, built on institutions that came out of the Second World War that have not really kept up with a changing world. Are we in a period of post-globalization? I don't actually believe so yet, but we are certainly at an inflection point.
Well, thank you all of you for setting the scene. What I'd like to do now, though, is sort of zone in on the domestic picture. Look, Charles, there's a new mayor in New York, the youngest, the first Muslim, the first mayor born in Africa, and a socialist too. What do you think that signals about a broader transformation in who holds power?
You know, in some ways, I think you could argue that Mamdani rode the same anti-establishment wave that Trump did, except the voter base, the demographic, is different, right? It's younger, it's less white, it's more urbanized, and Mamdani, I think, found the formula for speaking to their needs, for talking about affordability, about the cost of housing, about the cost of childcare, about the cost of food. He's calling for free public transportation. So he's speaking directly to many of the people that David just referenced that are having a very hard time making ends meet. I don't think that Mamdani in many respects is the future of the Democratic Party. I think in some respects it's more important to look at what happened in New Jersey and Virginia, where white, centrist, moderate women, both with national security credentials, won rather decisive elections to be the governors of those states. Both of them won by over 10 points. For me, they are the future of the Democratic Party. I think you need centrist candidates very much focused on pocketbook issues. And I do see Donald Trump's election not as some decisive swing to America First, but in many respects as a rejection of the status quo, a rejection of the party in power. And now you're going to see the American electorate start to swing towards the Democrats because Trump isn't delivering. And I think the Democrats need to pay attention to that and should very much focus on these core economic pocketbook issues.
But David, before they met, Mamdani called Donald Trump a despot, and the White House described the new mayor as a communist. When they actually did meet face to face, everything seemed far more cordial. Why the change, do you think?
Well, both figures are fundamentally politicians. And during campaign season, the way a politician talks is they demonize their opponent. They use very harsh language. In the United States, to call somebody a communist, as Trump did to Mamdani, is about the worst slur you can use. But once the election is over, it doesn't really pay many dividends to keep up the rhetoric. Mamdani, I think, did a very wise thing, and he kind of bent the knee and came down to the White House and met with President Trump. And he was friendly. He was cordial. He made this into a fun, engaging meeting with the president, and the president responded in kind. Fundamentally, they're both looking to be popular political figures, and I think they realize they can capitalize off each other's voter base by just appeasing each other and being kind and friendly, and now they'll move on. The fact is, President Trump needs New York City to succeed, because if New York City and Wall Street do well, the national economy does well, and Trump is desperate to rescue the national economy.
It does very much feel, though, that there is a sort of new America emerging, Mark. And I wonder why you think this is happening, what has changed, if it's the demographics, if it's the geopolitical backdrop, which we've touched on a little bit, or if it's a generational shift.
I do think people are getting extremely tired, actually quite exhausted by the hyperpolarization that's happened within American politics. And Charles said the right has gone right, the left has gone left. I'm not so sure the left has actually gone that far left. I think the right has gone populist. Lots of simple slogans to try and deal with difficult problems, and they haven't been dealt with. We've got an older president now, ironic after all of the Biden show last summer, but Trump is struggling to get a handle on the economy. Things aren't going particularly well geopolitically. Apparently, he has ended 8 wars. Some of the countries didn't even know they were in those wars, and an awful lot of them felt like photo ops. And people are beginning to see that what we have is a media presidency. We have a ratings presidency with an incumbent in the White House who is probably more attuned to the immediate news cycle than to any long-term strategy, be it at home or be it overseas, both to deliver making America great again at home or fulfilling whatever America's new role is to be internationally.
Let's talk some more about how all of this is changing America's role and position in the world. Charles, what long-term trends do you think will redefine the nature of the foreign policy establishment?
Early in the conversation, Juliet, I think you used the word inflection point. And I think that's exactly where we are. The long run of a world dominated by the United States and its fellow democracies is coming to an end, in part for internal reasons that we've been talking about, that the industrial age is ending, the digital age is beginning. We haven't figured out the future of work in the digital age, and that's why many of our own citizens are suffering. And this is a problem that is global in nature. It's coming to China. It's going to come to emerging countries in the global south, including India. So we need to have a conversation about what the digital age is going to look like. What are people going to do to earn a living wage? And I think we're also looking at a redistribution of power on a scale that we haven't seen for several hundred years. A shift back from west to east and from north to south. And so I do think that the key questions for the United States moving forward are, number one, how do we go about rebuilding the political center? How do we go about making sure that the American middle class is back on its feet and is again internationalist and again ready to stand by its partners and its friends around the world? And how do we manage this transition to a world in which there will be no clear captain, no anchor, in which the world will be decentered? It's not going to be an American century, a Chinese century, a Sino-centric era. It's going to be no one's world. And figuring out how to get there peacefully is a top priority.
David, what do you think? I mean, how is American foreign policy shifting due to generational, regional, demographic or technological reasons?
Well, I think American foreign policy is shifting rapidly right now because President Trump is in charge. And his foreign policy views are steadily evolving. They are difficult to predict, and they don't seem to be constrained by any serious ideology. President Trump makes up foreign policy as he goes along, it seems. But domestically, I think this ties into exactly what we've already talked about, that there is a lot of frustration among the American people who do not understand this global world we're living in right now. It is harder than ever to get a job that pays well in America. It is harder than ever to buy a house in America, to just succeed on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of Americans look abroad and think, well, this is the problem of globalization. We thought globalization was going to be great for the country because we would import cheap products and that would keep our consumer prices low. And in fact, what happened is a lot of jobs were outsourced off of American shores to different countries. And there's no quick solution to this. I think people are frustrated. They're looking to political leaders for some answers and to some long-term solutions that will eventually start to grow the American economy in a way that the middle class and the working class feels, and not just pads corporate pocketbooks. Unfortunately, we don't hear many of these solutions being talked about publicly. We have a very media-centric political class right now that seem like they're out to get shares and likes and clicks, but they're not really proposing solutions that are realistic, and they're not proposing solutions that are going to bring steady improvement to the American people. And this is what is frustrating Americans right now. They're desperate for change, and they're looking for real leadership.
Mark, how crucial to all of this are global existential threats like climate change and the impact of AI?
They are crucial, but perhaps not quite in expected ways. If we look at the America of Donald Trump at the moment, he calls it a golden age. It doesn't feel like a golden age. Possibly it feels a bit more like the Gilded Age. We've got something of the robber barons surrounding the White House at the moment. The difference is today that they're the tech bros, or they are the fossil fuels lobby. And in terms of fossil fuels and the climate crisis, it feels like America has stepped back 40, 50 years plus. That now the voice of big coal, the voice of oil, is dominating at the table. And that means withdrawing from the Paris Accords. It means not prioritizing new technologies that America really needs. The clean energy, be it waves, be it the sun, which there's plenty of over America for an awful lot of the time. All of these resources are being downplayed while we go back generationally to coal and oil. Meanwhile, the tech bros also have a place around the table. You've got to give them fantastic credit for the brilliant online game that they played to enable Trump to win the election back last November. They absolutely played the Democrats off the court. How much sway they hold at the moment, it is kind of difficult to tell, but America is still feeling its way. And certainly under this administration, perhaps the wrong influencers are having too much of a voice. And that does not play well in international relations.
How might a less interventionist US possibly create opportunities for powers like China?
Well, I think that David made a very important point in that Trump is not an ideologue. He's the head of an ideological movement called MAGA, and many of the people in that movement are quite ideological. But I think Trump is much more a transactional leader. He wants to make a deal. He wants bargains. He wants to show the American people that he can be a successful negotiator. That's why he's trying to end the war in Ukraine and cut the deal to end the war in Gaza. And so in many respects, I think that other countries, and in particular China, should take advantage of Trump. They should see Trump as a leader who doesn't have the same views about American primacy and about Pax Americana that the political establishment does, and try to cut a deal with Mr. Trump. I think that if Xi Jinping and Donald Trump can sit down and cut a trade deal, it would open up the opportunity for the United States and China to work together on many different fronts. Some of those that you just discussed with Mark, about climate change, about dealing with the advancement of technology, AI in particular. So I do think that there's an opportunity here because Trump is ready to break with the America First policies if they're not working. And quite honestly, they are not working. And that's why I think other countries like China should try to find an opportunity to work with someone who, in the end of the day, is looking to make a deal.
David, is that right? I mean, how do you see the likes of China reading this new America?
So I think what Charles said was totally correct. I think the big difference we see between China and the United States right now is that President Trump wants an immediate response. He wants to be on the front page of tomorrow's newspapers. He wants the headlines. He wants a story about him and what he's done. China doesn't really care about tomorrow's story. It is planning for long-term success. And in President Trump's first term, I think China had a difficult time dealing with the president because he was all over the map. He was not predictable. It was difficult to understand what he was trying to achieve, and China didn't know how to work with him. But I think they've developed a greater understanding, and they've learned some techniques to catch the president's attention. Things like when they stopped buying American soybeans, that absolutely crushed the American farmer and the soybean industry. It brought the farming community across the United States to its knees. It's the second time they've done this, and I think this captures the president's attention, and it brings the president to the table and willing to negotiate. And at a negotiating table, I think China has a very strong chance of talking about topics that are in their best interest, and then maybe the United States is willing to play ball with. And I think there is room for the United States and China to not view each other as adversaries or opponents, but as competitors. They both have mutual interests in a lot of these high-tech areas and a lot of major industrial concerns. And I think there is room for both China and the United States to benefit with these negotiations.
Mark, how much do you think that China and its role perhaps as leader of the global south is changing the way America sees itself on the global stage?
Well, it's changing the way that ordinary Americans are having to see America. Ever since arguably 1905 and the Great White Fleet sent out by Teddy Roosevelt, America has had this presence on the international stage where they are the cowboys in the white hats who go in and sort out the world's problems. That is absolutely not what Trump wants to do. He's stepping back from what he would see as not being the United States' responsibility. He is blind to whole areas of the world. And if he cannot see those immediate deals that David talked about, if he can't see the photo opportunities, then that is opening opportunities for others. And China is first in the queue for that. So whether it is in Africa, whether it is in other parts of Asia, probably not in the Western Hemisphere, this is where China will have great opportunity. Possibly only for the next 3 years. We don't know what's going to happen after that. But we have a president who China can learn the lessons from Trump's relationship with Putin and how strategically he can be led by other strong leaders who've got quite a well worked out strategy. He doesn't operate strategically. He goes from news cycle to news cycle, and he reacts. He is highly reactive as a president. All of these are unusual geopolitically, and all of them offer opportunities for China. If this isn't to be the rising China, the Chinese century, it's at least to get up towards parity with the United States, which is not a situation that we've had for the last 80, 90 years.
Charles, what do the changes we're seeing in the US mean for Europe and its relationship with America?
I think that at the beginning of the Trump administration, there was grave concern that the Atlantic Partnership might be coming undone. During his first term, Trump had talked about withdrawing from NATO. Early on in his second term, he basically threw Ukraine under the bus, tossing President Zelensky out of the Oval Office and looking like he was going to blame Ukraine for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You know, now that we're toward the end of 2025, things actually look more continuous than destined for change. There was a good NATO summit. European allies have agreed to spend up to 5% of GDP on defense. The deal that Ukraine is confronted with, at least initially, isn't a good deal, but it's now being renegotiated by the United States alongside Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. So my best guess is that 3 years from now, when Trump leaves office, the Atlantic Alliance will look a lot like it does today. I think maybe there will be a decrease in the U.S. military presence in Europe. Trump will want Europeans to do more. But in the end of the day, Europe remains America's best partner. America remains Europe's best partner. And I think that reality will allow both sides to survive the bumps in the road that are part of the Trump presidency.
So, David, how can Europe rethink cooperation with this more diverse America?
So I think European countries and European leaders should be seeing the next few years as a massive opportunity. For the previous 75 years, I think the United States and Europe have worked in tandem a lot, but the United States has tended to take the lead in a lot of negotiations and setting up a world order that is really ideal for the United States' personal interests or domestic interests. But now the United States is pulling back globally and is pulling back in a lot of areas where Europe is ready to step forward. We've talked about some of them: climate change, energy. These are major areas that are going to define the next century. And the United States is no longer a leader. In fact, the United States is barely in the conversation right now. And I think this is going to give major European nations a chance to step forward, both as the European Union, the world's third largest economy, and as individual domestic nations step forward and assert their own leadership and become world leaders in their own right. I think what we're seeing is a redefining of the concentration of power across the globe. And it's really going to transition away from kind of United States control and be more diversified. And I think Europe is going to be a beneficiary of that.
And one of the reasons that Trump isn't part of all the conversations is because he's so sceptical of supranational bodies like the EU. You know, Mark, how does the creation of the BRICS and other multinational blocs indicate the emergence of maybe more new middle powers or multi-aligned powers that will have more influence on the world stage?
Yeah, I think it's very much as David says. We now no longer have that one leader so economically, militarily, and politically ahead of the rest. Trump has stepped back from that role. It may change again in a few years' time. But at the moment, there is a great opportunity for other groups to assert themselves. A lot of it comes down to confidence. And for a long time, European leaders were just prepared to humour Trump. They were prepared to flatter him. They've now kind of found a way that they can make that work. Other groups are equally finding their own strategies of how to coexist with a mercurial leader who often you don't know what he's going to do from week to week or day to day even. Modi has managed him pretty well, and I think Xi manages him well every time they meet. But never forget, with Trump's America, as soon as Trump is out of the room, he's largely forgetting what's just been agreed before and is on to whatever is his next interest. That can actually be an advantage for other groups that act a bit more strategically and step into the space, whether it is the BRICS, whether it's the EU, whatever alliance it may be. This is not the end of geopolitical alliances around the world, and I suspect it's more of a short-term blip.
Mark Shanahan, Charles Kupchan, David Andersen, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.